I discovered in early interviews, including one with his vice party secretary's brother, that there were many people who had not talked with him in 30 or 40 years and would not. So these memories of the past sometimes have the potential to significantly influence the attempts of individuals to prevent reform-era rulers from inflicting yet another round of suffering and loss. If we follow the work of Arthur Kleinman and Stephen Southwick and Dennis Charney, who are medical doctors, psychiatrists at Yale, then we begin to understand how survivors of a traumatic experience like the Great Leap and its disorder and suffering have relied on these memories to mobilize resistance to the Communist Party misrule in the present. And so this actually invites us to conceive of resistance itself as a way of carrying on with everyday life. And in the process, freeing themselves from the disordered past. That is the conception of resistance that I hope you'll think about. So, let me move to the last short section, which is on taxation, and I want to give you an example of how this played out in one place I studied. So when Deng Xiaoping came to power in 1978, China went to this new system called Baoqiandawu, or household responsibility system, where in the States said to people who previously had their land taken away and usurped or stolen because it was private land before the state took it in 1958 and before. They were going to go back to household agricultural farming, and of course people welcomed that, and people were allowed to do things like till their own land, go into the market, run sidelines or participate in animal husbandry. And what they had to do first and foremost was basically agree to a contract where they would deliver a portion of the harvest that the state wanted to the state first. And after that, they could more or less take what was left and use the power they wanted. And of course, this was hailed as a great innovation, a radical change, a success. Actually, it was no such thing for reasons I'm not going to have time to go into here, but the point here is that people welcomed it because, after all, it was a step away from being tethered to Mao-era oppressions and radical extractions. Nonetheless, when we see what happened in this period with this new system in place and the local party leaders across China, this happened in just about every province, now, keeping what Deng Xiaoping had ordered in place, the Baoqiandawu system, or the household responsibility system, and new taxes piled onto it. Taxes taken on the harvest and surtaxes. Before long, roughly about 10 to 15 years, people were in very serious trouble with tax collection. It was a burden. It sometimes exceeded 20% of household income and put people right at the edge of subsistence again. So the point here is that the memory of life-threatening procurement in the Great Leap Forward influenced the tax resistance that occurred in the Deng Xiaoping era. And as I said, to be sure, farmers in many parts of China who were experts in agricultural efficiency welcomed the change over to household-based farming. But the heavy burden of local party tax assessments, which were increasingly taken by force in the 1990s. In one village I studied, what happened was that they formed a special tax police force and they broke into people's homes, even the homes of defiant farmers, to seize their grain. And more farmers saw these break-ins as a cause to recall the vigilante politics of the Great Leap era, when cadres basically invaded homes to seize grain, especially in 1959 and 60, a process that both Mao and Deng facilitated. So The heavy tax burden of local party assessments in combination with this force pushed many people to the brink by the time you get into the mid-90s. And we know, not just in the area I studied, which is really a micro-level study of just a few villages in one remote border area of North China. You know, we know that there were a host of tax riots, tax rebellions, various forms of tax resistance that welled up. And what we want to keep in mind here is that basically the reason this happened was that this tax assessment of the local party cadres, coupled with the obligation to first pay grain due to the central government at its own dictated or protected price, quickly turned the household responsibility system into a shackles. It was even more shackles because in China, the state still had a monopoly on anything you need by way of an input in agriculture, be it chemical fertilizer, pesticide, or seed. You had to buy those from the state at the state's price. If you couldn't pay, you were going to go under. It didn't matter that you had the household responsibility system. So the farmers in the area I studied rejected this system outright because they were unable to keep what was rightfully their moral share of the harvest. And they had no choice but to resist this dung-era tax system, which one could say was put together helter-skelter in a way. They resisted it in countless ways, including, as I've gone into in the paper, tax evasion, rumor, underreporting of income, and refusal. And refusal was really critical to people being able to survive. That was a tool of the Great Leap era resistance to procurement that people brought back. As one of our colleagues said this morning, these weapons of the weak did not always work, especially in the Great Leap because the state overwhelmed them. Still, people tried to mobilize them and use them to the extent that they could in the face of overwhelming force and imprisonment in the commune, in the people's commune in the Mao era. So what's interesting to me about this movement of the 1990s is a couple of things. First of all, it did not have any approval of the central government. It took place outside of institutional channels. And eventually, it pushed Beijing to the point to where, some of you know, the central government did something unprecedented and it abolished the agricultural tax in 2006. The interesting thing here is that if you look at the psychology of this, many scholars have written about this, including the Deng Xiaoping officials and their train of culture workers and propagandists, have portrayed this change or this reform as an act of benevolence. But if you talk to local people, they will tell you that it was a belated concession made out of Beijing's fear of revolt from below, rather than a voluntary act of beneficence. And the other thing that struck me here, which is in the interviews, and I have more than is in the version that I've given to people in the conference here, it is that the number of times that people told us, me and my interview team, a small number of people who helped me with this project, that the reason they participated in refusal, that they took up refusal protests, and that they engaged tax resistance so fiercely in this period, is because they felt that the taxation system was pushing them into another famine. And what that meant was another famine of the state, another procurement like famine. The last point I want to make here is that in reference to what I'm talking about right now, it seems to me two things are important. The first is that, and it goes back to something I think Nicholas Worth said this morning, related to one point you made. If you look at the reason China had a famine in the first place, going back to the Great Leap famine, it was related to a long train of factors. And one of the critical factors, which oddly enough has been studied but has been I think, studied to some extent in the wrong ways, is how procurement over time worked to disarm the ability of farmers in China to protect themselves against famine. You know, we have this story in Jasper Becker that China was a land of famine every so many years. If you look locally, that's not the case. Not only is it not the case, even though people live pretty close to the margin, and Tawny's metaphor and land and labor, you know, just being a place where, you know, another ripple will drown someday and they'll go under. Still, yet, in China, people had crafted these ageless strategies of survival against famine. But one of the things that I've learned over the years in studying famine in China, is applicable to this case, is people always knew how close they were to famine. And one of the things that they wanted to do to protect themselves, that they always tried to do, is when the harvest was good, they would try to store as much as they could to protect themselves, ensure themselves against a famine downturn in the next year or two. So sometimes you see houses having 2 or 3, you know, years of grain stored. Right? The procurement process in China from very early on began to make it impossible for farmers to do this. And so did this new wave of taxation in the 1990s. And this is one of the reasons that you had this wave of resistance to it. And so I think what's interesting here is that when you look now at the interpretation, this is the last comment here, in case you're getting ready to buzzer. You know, the state and society came away with 2 very different interpretations of this. The central government interpretation was, you could probably go to China and find 5 to 6 other Chinese intellectuals who've never seen a Chinese farmer, wouldn't know what one was if they were to tell you that, oh, we had this great reform policy, and now, you know, whoever it is, who, you know, it doesn't matter whether it was Hu or Xi Jinping, you know, now we have these best emperors of China, and therefore the party did a good thing, and people much more appreciate it, and now they not only appreciate the government, they're not interested in resisting it. That interpretation falls apart against the way people experience this at the local level. The way they experienced it at the local level was that they fought a long-running battle against the state here, and eventually they won. And that empowered them to not only think about resistance having worked in that case, but to take it up and pursue it in other areas. Thank you.